Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Headlines. Today, we actually have an amazing guest. Her name is Dr. Rachael Wittern, and she is from Northwestern College in Iowa in Sioux City. I'd like to welcome all of our viewers today, too, and especially thank Shayna and our mods in the chat for taking care of everything. I'd also like to call your attention to the fundraiser today. As you know, every time I do a stream, I always have a fundraiser for either the guest or a guest cause. That leads me to how I met Dr. Wittern. We'll call her Rachael today. I met her through Dave Nonemacher, who does the Ray of Life builds for the organization that provides all of these lights that go to Ukraine. He was a previous guest. So this has been a wonderful circle of wonderful people that I've met. Today with Dr. Wittern, we are going to be covering mainly Ukrainians with PTSD, the refugees, and what's going on in Ukraine. But we're also going to talk to her about her previous experience with PTSD, which has also been with the veterans in the United States. So Dr. Wittern, I'm going to go right to you now, and I'm going to have you introduce yourself to everybody and give us a little bit of background about yourself, how you got into psychology, and how you decided to go into teaching and studying PTSD.
My parents did a couple of international adoptions with some older children who had some mental health issues. And I saw my parents taking them to therapy and really got interested in what the counseling field was. I saw how counseling could be helpful and thought that maybe that was a direction that I wanted to go. I didn't think that I would go that way while I was an undergrad when I realized I needed to go to graduate school in order to become a therapist. But I ended up getting my PhD because you should never say never when you're going to do anything, because God will challenge you on that. So that's how I got into therapy.
So was your first job then at the veterans for PTSD? What was your first job in psychology as a counselor?
No. So while I was still a PhD student, you have to go through what's called an internship in order to graduate. And you go through this match process and you interview with a bunch of different places, and then you rank them, how much you like them, and then they rank you, how much they like you. And so you'll wake up one morning and find out if you got an internship or if you didn't, and if so, where you'll end up. And so I actually woke up one morning and found that I had joined the Army as an Army clinical psychologist. So I was joking with you earlier that I kind of accidentally joined. I had applied to 2 Army internships, but also a whole bunch of other internships, and had signed paperwork that said that if I matched with a military site, I was in the Army, and if not, I wasn't. And so I woke up one morning and realized I had joined the military, and
That's a funny story.
Sure about my life choices in that moment.
I'm so happy you went there, because our audience knows Commander McMillan, who's on our channel as a guest host, and he answered an ad in the paper, and it just ended up being a recruiter. And I think that's so funny how that happened for you. So tell us a little bit about your time in the Army then.
Well, I was very fortunate. I matched with the internship program at Tripler in Honolulu, Hawaii. So you don't have to feel too bad for me. After officer basic training, I was sent to Hawaii, where I made some really good friends and got to do training there. So that was really fun. Well, mostly fun. I'm not a runner, so there's parts of it that weren't weren't exactly fun, but it was really good training. And I went on to do my postdoc also in Hawaii with a military unit there. And so during this time, I was immersed in military and trauma psychology, which I'm really thankful for, looking back. Even if in the minute, while I was running up mountains with a unit, maybe I wasn't as thrilled.
Well, being ex-military myself, Navy, we have a lot of veterans in our audience too that will see this program, and thank you for your service, Shu. Everybody appreciates someone who served our country. So, did you work with veterans after you got out of the military, or just while you're in with military while you were in, or did you do any work afterwards?
Yeah, that's a good question. So after my military training, I was then sent to Fort Rucker and became an aeromedical psychologist there. So I worked with a lot of flight students in the military, but I also was able to see dependents and veterans through the clinic as well. So my first work with veterans, at least as a licensed psychologist, was in that clinic. And then after serving in the military, I decided to get out for a little bit more stability, and I worked at the Tampa VA for a few years.
What would you say were some of your biggest challenges with working with military and veterans and families and PTSD?
Well, one of the biggest difficulties, I would say, is that in the military, people are always moving and deploying, and so it can be difficult to get consistency with treatment. With the VA, maybe that's not quite as much of an issue because a lot of the people you're seeing are retired, but I do think that there's a lack of mental health professionals who are practicing these days. And so there's often really long wait lists to be able to see a therapist. And even once you get in, you may not be able to see them as frequently as they would like to see you. And so I really think that we have a lack of provider availability.
And continuity of care is huge when it comes to mental health. When you have to tell your story over and over to different people, it is sort of like starting all over again, to getting to know some person. Do you find that that's really important too?
Yeah, I forget what study it is, but there have been a few different studies that have suggested that the relationship with the provider actually determines more of the likely success than the modality the provider uses or how much experience the provider has. So that relationship piece is very important in you being able to make progress in therapy.
How many total years have you been actually practicing clinical psychology then?
You're going to make me do math on the air.
More than 5, more than 10. What I'm kind of going for here is, have you seen treatment modalities and helping people change over the years, or is it pretty much the same methods being done since you graduated with your degrees? Or that's what I'm going for here.
Okay, well, I realize it's fairly easy math. I joined the Army in 2014, so it's a bit over 10 years. I'm not going to say there's been any major advances that I know of, but there are more studies validating some of these evidence-based treatments that we have for PTSD. At least in the military and the VA, there's 3 main what we call evidence treatments or evidence-based treatments that are used most frequently. There's something called CPT or cognitive processing therapy. There's something called PE or prolonged exposure. And then there's something called EMDR or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is always difficult to say when you're under pressure. But all 3 of these treatments have a good evidence basis to their efficacy, and the majority of people who complete them, so not just do 1 or 2 sessions, but complete a course of the treatment, see significant benefit. So
kind of to back up a little bit for our audience, can you describe, we all know what PTSD, what the letters means. It's, some trauma that you've been through, but there's so many different types of trauma. Can you go ahead and tell our audience the different types of trauma that you've seen, with obviously military, but some of the different categories that you treat people for?
Well, in the military, as you might expect, combat trauma is one of the more common types of trauma. I'm not sure if I would consider it a separate category, but something that is really starting to be studied now is something called moral injury. So if you saw something or participated in something that really goes against your morals or values, and you're really struggling how to process it, that certainly can be part of PTSD. And I know some people in the military also come in with some kind of childhood abuse or trauma that can compound the trauma that they experience in war. Okay.
And I think too, have you seen, I hear about PTSD being involved with domestic relationships. It's not just child abuse, but it's spousal abuse. Do you see things like that too, especially with the stress of people that are in the military or just life in general?
Well, I think that some of the stressors of military life certainly can impact relationships, not even from a domestic violence standpoint, although sadly that is sometimes the case. But when it comes to frequent deployments or being gone a lot, like that can be something that really puts a toll on families. In the military couples that I worked with, they would have to adjust to being together. And then, maybe a year later, not being together for a year, and then readjusting to being together. And so trauma aside, just piecing together, how do we work as a family unit when it's just mom and the kids for a while, and then it's everybody, and then it's just mom and the kids. Like, how do we be a cohesive team throughout this can be a challenge, even if the military member hasn't seen anything traumatic during their deployments.
Separation in families is definitely a huge thing. When somebody goes, then you have to get to know each other, and maybe they had some life changes, you had some life changes. So it's definitely an adjustment. We do take questions from our audience, and I just want to reiterate to everybody, if you do have a question for Dr. Wittern, please tag at the Shills, and Shayna can go ahead and grab your question and put it in the question room. I'm more than happy to take your questions and answer them today. And again, I see more people joining, so thank you very much for joining us today. The main chunk of our discussion today is Dr. Wittern's work with Ukrainians. I'll tell a little bit about how I met you as far as your region, and then I want you to go ahead and tell the rest of the story, Dr. Wittern, Rachael.
Sure.
So, as I said, I met Dr. Rachael through Dave Nonemacher, but Dave actually knew Martha Holsoff and all the community that's in Iowa with the Ukraine refugee community. A lot of people are intertwined in helping and learning about the needs of the Ukrainian refugees. Martha told a lot about that. They need everything from a place to stay, help getting food, schools, everything like that. And Rachael is very active in that community, helping the Ukrainians. And she actually decided to put together a survey to find out what are the needs of refugees when they come over here, what's impacting them, and create a toolbox for other clinicians. So, Rachael, I'm going to have you go ahead and describe your experience with the refugee community and the survey, and hopefully what's going to come out of that survey.
Sure. Well, I guess I can back up a bit to connect all of this to Dave, since you mentioned that. So funny enough, some of my college roommates and I actually stayed with him and his wife probably 10, 11 years ago And she helped us on the Superior hiking trail. So we all went backpacking for a bit. And
that's cool. I didn't know that. That's a very cool story.
So I had met Dave before all this, although, I'm not quite sure how he knew one of my roommates, but that's an aside. And so when I saw him again during the light build at my church, I went up and said hi and said, "Oh, hey, I remember you." And, he said he remembered my group of friends too. And I didn't really think anything of it. And the next day he called and said, "Oh, hey, Rachael, I was stalking you. I see you have experience with trauma." And I thought, uh-oh, nobody says this to me without, having some kind of ask. So we had a long conversation that day where he mentioned that some people who had recently come over were struggling and was just wondering if there was anything that I could do. And I said I would look into it. And, the first thing a researcher or psychologist often does is go to the published literature. And I, at that time, only could find 2 studies on anything about mental health and displaced Ukrainians. And neither of these 2 studies were done in the US, and neither of them really gave much of a picture. Like, they used really small screening instruments and suggested that, yes, maybe there was an increase in anxiety in the population, which makes sense. But they really didn't go very in depth or help me to really understand what the needs of the population were. And, if I'm going to go in and try to do some kind of group work, I want to have an idea of who I'm working with and what their needs are to best help me prepare. And I'd even called up another therapist friend that I knew and said, "Oh, hey, have you done any work with people from Ukraine?" And she said, "Well, yes." And I called something a trauma group and nobody showed up. So she said, I don't really have any ideas of what to do. I just can tell you some things not to do. So I felt like I was really starting from ground zero, but did start meeting every couple of weeks with a translator just to understand what some of the group, at least in Iowa's, needs were. And now I'm trying to get 300 participants, so displaced Ukrainians who have moved to the US because of the war. And I'm trying to get their participation in an online survey to help me really understand what their needs are so that I can anonymously share this information with other mental health providers in the US in order to try to help provide better care and maybe even develop some interventions specific to the population if that would be helpful. And I'm fortunate enough to be joined by a couple other psychologists and researchers and a Ukrainian research assistant who's out in California who's been really helpful. But one of the problems with doing an online survey is when you put out a link, oftentimes bots will take your survey. And so we have had thousands of responses, but so far we've only been able to show that about 111 of them were real people. Now, some of these may have been, my research assistant is still looking through them and digging through them, but we're really in need of having real people take the survey. So what I can say is to put out a shameless plug for this study. If you're a Ukrainian who is living in the US because of the war, please take this survey and help mental health providers better understand what your experiences and needs are. And there is a $20 gift card for participation for the first 300 people who take the survey. So I do want to compensate you for your time if you're willing to help with this. I don't know if we can provide my email address after the show or during the show, but if you do take the study, you're welcome to send me or my research assistant an email so that we can kind of fast track you to getting your gift card and you're not getting stuck, having to be sorted through like all these bot responses.
Okay. So anybody who sees this, I'm going to be dropping the links in the chat. If you click on the link, this survey is in Ukrainian because it's meant for Ukrainians. there's a couple, I have talked to quite a few people out there who actually have Ukrainian refugee communities in their area. I know there's a big one in Madison, Wisconsin, and I don't see them in the chat right now, but UTV and Ham, I think we talked about this. But we're going to go ahead and drop the link in there, and then also drop Dr. Witterns' email. And again, if you know any Ukrainians who are refugees, Ukrainian communities, please reach out and give them this survey so that she can get the data on this. Let's see. Okay, let me go in here and grab these. Because the information that comes from this is going to ultimately help Ukrainians in the U.S. deal with their mental health needs. And Dr. Wittern, you said that it would hopefully provide some tools for other clinicians, right?
Right. So my hope for this is that once I analyze the data, once we're able to get enough participants that we can take a look at it, is to share this aggregate information with other mental health providers. And as part of a small grant I've gotten through the APA, or the American Psychological Association, I'm required to share with at least some kind of group. And I'm hoping to share it with therapists first and foremost, since they would be the most, receptive, but they would be most helped by this data. If we can better understand what people are going through, then we can be better prepared to help them.
Okay. My team here is asking for the links. Guys, I think I'll drop them in the green room, but I also think that you can take them out of the chat too. So, and looks like my mouse that's really weird. My mouse just died. So, yeah, that's odd. Okay, I haven't had that happen before. So you had run bi-weekly therapy groups. Can you tell me or tell our audience some of the things that you were able to talk about with the refugees?
Well, the first couple of meetings were kind of about adjusting to the US, some stressors people face when adjusting to new cultures. A lot of the meetings have been basically just different stress management skills to try to make it inclusive for everyone. You know, even though everyone has gone through stressors because of the war and because of the move, not everybody feels the same way about it, or not everybody experiences the same things, but most people do experience some kind of stress. So we've talked about different techniques to help reduce stress, to sleep better, to stay in community. All of those things can help people to feel better. And they've been things that we've focused on. Mm-hmm. Now, we haven't been meeting bi-weekly recently. Over the summer, it seems that people's schedules get pretty busy. But we'll probably be starting to meet up again a bit more in the fall once things kind of calm down.
Okay. I just want to send a message to my team, guys. My mouse just decided to die at the last minute here, which is really odd. So I can't scroll through. But I'm going to try to get that troubleshooted here pretty quick. One thing I want to I kind of want to delve in as a little side thing, Rachael, is the college that you work at is a Christian college, and it's faith-based. And you're hopefully, if I get this right, you're going to be developing a survey, or you have it developed and it's getting translated to be distributed by the Chaplains of Mariupol Battalion. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. So this is another Dave-initiated project here. Mm-hmm. So he also reached out asking if there might be a way to provide additional resources for these chaplains. And from what he's described to me, these chaplains are often on the front line, visiting people from civilians to military who have been affected by the war and trying to provide a message of hope and trying to serve them in whatever way they can. And so a different team and I are going to be opening up a somewhat similar online survey, but specific to the chaplains, asking them what their needs are, because if we can help them to reduce their own stress, they'll be better able to help other people. And another thing that we're hoping to understand through this survey of the chaplains, not the other survey, but the chaplain survey, is to understand what kind of training they have in mental health, like what they know about mental health. And another clinician and I are hoping to develop a series of videos or some kinds of trainings to help them to better understand PTSD and trauma and other stressors due to war and what they can do. What kinds of things they can do to best assist others, how they can help themselves in this process, but also helping them know when they should refer to a mental health provider. Like, when is this something that we should get a professional in for? And what are the things that we can help people with? And so this survey is still in the process. It's just been translated, and we're working on getting it up and going, hopefully within the next month or so. But hopefully that can be developed so that we can provide better interventions for that population. So there's a lot of moving pieces here in the research.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I had spoke with Dave about when we were talking about you and your work, he said that when he was in Ukraine, he could just tell by the looks in people's eyes, how much trauma they have been through, and I mean, that's sort of an understatement, because everybody's dealing with war trauma, and some of the things the atrocities that have happened over there. Do you have a sense of, what he told me was that hopefully this will come out as basically a toolkit for people who are in the chaplains battalion, but also other volunteers that are over there. Do you know what the availability of mental health support is in Ukraine? He had mentioned that he thought it was available in larger cities, but not in those villages. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm certainly not an expert in the resources available in Ukraine. I know there are some websites like Mental Health for Ukraine that do try to help people with mental health and also try to help them to make decisions as to if they should see a professional or not. I also know one of the ladies that I'm working with does work with a master's in therapy program in the capital, but I'm not entirely sure how spread out services are. And I would be surprised if there were a whole lot of mental health specialists, in the smaller villages. Kind of like in the US, you're a lot more likely to find more therapists in big cities versus, rural areas.
Mm-hmm. I think hopefully as time goes on, there'll be more people getting into it, because it's going to be years and years and years and years of help for people over there that they need, and also in the U.S. For the refugee population. Rachel, I'm going to have you do something really quick for me. If you look in the little area of toolbars on the platform that we're in, you should see a chat box there. If you open that, can you put your email in there so that they can drop that for you?
Sure. Let me make sure I spell my name correctly.
Okay, and then Dick will go ahead and get that in there. And sorry, everybody, my computer is saying that it doesn't recognize my mouse anymore, and it's plugged in. So I don't know. It just said a major malfunction there. I do want to go through. We did have some super chats and our super sticker from Yvonne Way, and we had some memberships gifted. And I would really like to thank you for all of that. Any support that you give the channel is much appreciated. Also, for those of you who just joined us, we do have a link at the top of the chat. Rachael, since she knows Dave Nonemacher, who's in the Ray of Life Lightbox project, we've chosen that for a charity today. Those boxes are about $125 to actually get everything to put together in them and contribute to shipping costs. And then Dave gets all the parts and pieces and gets groups together to put those together. So any help that you can do for them. I believe when he was on here before, we raised about $525. So any help with that, doesn't have to be $125, just a little bit would help with that for him. So I want to go into a little bit about the community that I've been introduced with all of you. You're all very faith-based. And I want to touch on that a little bit because I tell people when you need to get involved in the Ukraine, or when you get involved with supporting the Ukraine community, a lot of, let's just call them church groups or faith-based groups, really have a lot of resources. And it's just sort of like just add water. You've got the people, you've got the financial support. Can you comment a little bit about how being in a Christian college setting and then working in the Christian community has helped you with your work? Has it influenced you with anything?
I think my faith is what keeps me going when the work gets tough. And I think when it comes to mental health, I think that helping people with their mental health just really fulfills what Jesus said were the greatest commandments, to love God and to love one's neighbor. And I don't know of a better way to do that, at least in my profession, than trying to take the time to understand the experience of people who are going through large stressors and difficult life situations. So I'm not sure I totally answered that question, but certainly it's a faith-based reason to engage in this kind of work.
It's a great answer. And I find too that I have to go back when we have losses in the community and bad news, that sometimes the only thing that keeps you going is just faith, whether it's I say prayers faith or just I have a lot of hope faith. It definitely is something that you can fall back on. And YouTube is full of every different kind of people. We have atheists, we have people who just have belief in the universe, and some people who are practicing Christians. But I think that whatever we do in life, we have to have a support network. If it's the people around us, if it's our faith. And I felt really, really fortunate to have met so many people in this wonderful circle, and you guys are linked with that, and it's been really positive for me. So just thought I'd add that comment. One of the things, I'm not seeing too many questions in chat, but let me go back again and tell everybody about the survey. Again, the survey is in Ukrainian. Somebody asked me if there's a translation in English. Is there a translation, or we just have this to distribute in Ukrainian?
Because the target was Ukrainians, we only have it available in Ukrainian. We were worried that if we put it out in English, even more bots would take it, and we wouldn't be getting the right target audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that bots and in social media, it's incredible. Just as a side note, I know people that are literally making it their life mission to shut bots down because they disseminate all sorts of propaganda. They cause trouble in channels. They're little troublemakers everywhere. And the term bot farm, I didn't really know too much about it until got into the Ukraine community and all these bot farms, which are, filling the internet with all this garbage, and it's definitely something that needs to be dealt with. And I don't know, I think it's such a hard problem, such a big problem right now. I don't know how we're going to do it. So hopefully by getting to real people. But again, on the survey, Rachael needs to get this survey into the hands of Ukrainian refugees in the United States. So if you know somebody, or if you know groups, if there's a Ukrainian refugee center in your city, go ahead and forward this on and just make contact, because they do. Rachael, can you tell us again about how you sort these? Because I think if we just get this out there, no matter who answers it, you'll end up being able to sort it later on, right?
What do you mean by that, sorting it?
Well, say somebody gets a hold of it, somebody who's not a refugee, but they speak Ukrainian, and it's like, I'll just answer this. So obviously they're not in your target group. Bots aren't in your target group. So right. You're going to have, and I've done research before too, and there's this pile of garbage. Garbage. Oh, this is a treasure. Garbage. So, and yes. From what I understand, you have the assistant in California that's doing your sorting.
Yes. So we do have some checks and balances already built into the survey equipment. It does sort out for bots and flags some of the responses, but then the ones that it doesn't flag out, then she looks at. And anybody who emails us will look at those responses first, because we're more likely to think that those are real people. I do want to add, if anyone has taken the survey and has not gotten an email from me or from one of my assistants, please do send me an email. I don't want your data to get lost somewhere, and I do want you to be compensated for your time. So if you have taken it and you haven't heard from me about a gift card, please do reach out to me, and I'll make sure that we respond to you in a reasonable amount of time.
Okay, and her email is being dropped by the crew in the chat too. I saw a question pop up from one of our viewers, and she actually is in. It's a little off topic, but it's a great question. She actually is has done work in equine therapy with horses and people. Can you comment on if you have any experience with knowing therapists that use equine therapy or dog therapy in treating PTSD?
That's not my area of expertise. Most clinical psychologists don't work with animals. We're trained in more talk therapies and assessment. So I really don't know the data surrounding that, but I certainly can't see that, being harmful. I think that both horses and dogs really can help regulate the body and can reduce stress. So if that's available, absolutely give it a try.
Mm-hmm. This she's one of our wonderful viewers. She's actually has plans to go over there and try to start an organization to do this. So, and I've been involved in California. There was a little nonprofit, and this lady had a whole bunch of horses, and she trained the horses, but she also picked them because they were just so calm and wonderful. And she used it for kids that were either kind of in their shell from trauma, and it did bring them out. So it does work if the person is open to it. It definitely works, and it can get kids socialized. I've seen that for sure. So I'm a big proponent of it. I've never seen how it works with PTSD, but I think I've personally, but I think there's a few videos on YouTube about veterans that work with animals and things like that. So I added, just to let everybody know, I added on a topic for Rachael that I wanted to address for specifically our community. Since the start of the war, everybody has been, watching the news. We've watched the tanks sit outside of Kyiv. We've seen, the footage from Bucha. We've seen all these horrific things, and the war is going on a lot longer than anyone expected. There's people who watch Telegram and click on Telegram and all the videos there and the videos on X, as well as people in the community who live in Ukraine. We have YouTubers that live in Ukraine. We know them personally. We have friends that are in Ukraine. One of my best friends in the chat, she is currently in Kyiv. Everybody knows her, Janine. And as a community, we all suffer alongside of each other with the trauma from this war because of what we see. Now, people like Janine, obviously, and Helena from Project Constantine's in the chat too. Hello, Helena. And, they're experiencing it firsthand. But those of us who are online doing YouTubing, people that are supporting, are watching this. And I've had messages from people saying, I'm not doing well. I'm really overwhelmed. These losses, these personal losses we've lost friends, you name it. Can you talk a little bit about some things that might help our community cope a little bit better with what we're going through, and knowing that we're in it for the long haul, supporting and getting the word out, winning hearts and minds, and that means informing people about the war? And any thoughts on that?
Well, I think one of the important things to do is to try to make it a part of your schedule rather than it being this thing you're just impulsively doing throughout the day. It's certainly understandable that you want to be informed on what's going on with your community and your home, but if every time you see your phone, you're picking it up to scroll through, then that's going to be taking up a big portion of your day, and the stress is going to continue to rise. I would recommend maybe checking the news, once a day in the morning, and then vowing not to look at it until the next day so that you get into the schedule. I don't recommend looking at it right before bed because that's going to make it difficult to fall asleep. It's difficult to sleep when you're not relaxed. And of course, when we're not sleeping, then that exacerbates other stressors. And so I guess that would be my first recommendation, is just limit the time and make it part of your schedule. But then second, I would suggest that people, instead of spending a lot of time online about this, people spend time in community with other people who care about the same issues. Oftentimes when we're grieving and feeling down and depressed, we tend to isolate, and that actually can make that grief feel worse because then we feel alone and isolated in our grief. And most people find it helpful to have a community, whether that be their church community or other people with similar backgrounds in their area, whatever that may be. Finding a community is really helpful because these people can actually be there with you and support you. That's a lot more important than people who just post likes on social media, even though that can be a bit of a dopamine hit and feel good. People who can actually be there with you and put their arm around you as you cry if you need to, or as you vent or process what's going on. The impact of real community is so important. So I think those would be my top 2 tips, is just make it a manageable time frame when you're looking at these things, and then don't allow yourself to isolate when you start to feel down or worried.
So that's interesting because a lot of us I think the pandemic kind of did this to us, a little bit, was that because we couldn't go out and couldn't be part of the communities, we were more online. I pretty much in this chat, I told you, I know everybody. It's like, I don't know them personally, but I know their personalities. I know what they joke about. I know, the things they're involved in. I know what other channels they're going into and listening to. And we do have a very supportive community, but I think too that when we're all suffering the same thing, it is kind of hard to be support for other people. But we do have, we call it VCs. It's these chat rooms where you literally go on, you can see people like we're doing now, and you can talk, and we're real. But yeah, the arm around and the hug thing is we've become very dependent on the virtual hug. But sometimes I think too, hearing a human voice, but it's definitely one thing that's I see our community suffering. And, I thank you so much for your advice. And it is hard to tune out, or what is it? Turn off and tune out. Is that what they say? Is that the line that they say? Because we have an international community, so it's easy to stay on your phone all night. It is.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I'm certainly not trying to say that online relationships aren't good, especially if you're staying in touch with people that you already know, that you feel connected to. Technology is great in keeping us involved in those people's lives. But if we're using it as a substitute for getting out and meeting people in our community and getting connected with groups, then it can be harmful if that's all we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Self-isolating and you forget what the sun feels like on your face. That is not good. No, that's not a good thing. But in Iowa, we don't have a choice. We have to go out and clean up after the storm. So we're kind of forced to go outside. Where do you, I want to, if you could talk to your future self, talking to your younger self, and imagine that, and just say, this is what I would dream that you would be doing, and what are some of your hopes and dreams and aspirations for your field that you'd like to accomplish?
Well, one thing I would like to see addresses a concern I mentioned before, which is I'd like to see more people going into mental health. One of the barriers to care for many people is these long wait lists to see someone. And I just think that's so sad. If someone is suffering and they finally worked up the courage to actually call a provider and then they have to be on a wait list, that can be really disheartening. So I would love to see more people go into therapy. I'm not sure how we convince people that several more years of school is what they want to do, but if they feel like it's something that they're really called to, I'd like to support that. And I think that's one of the reasons that I really love teaching is I love talking to people about the future and trying to help them discern what their calling is, what their passions and values are, and what that can look like in a future career. And for some of them, that may be counseling.
So do you think that there'll be, obviously, if you're going to have, being a licensed clinical psychologist, you have to have the degrees and the licensing and all of that. Do you see a need for people who would, like in Ukraine, be trained, like the first responders, be trained with some tools to handle some of the emotional trauma that they get with? And I'm going to be blunt here. Dave, and I'm not sure, I think you and I might have mentioned this too, dealing with all of the rape victims over in Ukraine. The numbers are just staggering. If you don't have somebody who has the official licensing and the degrees, do you see that it would be possible for people to be trained enough to just be counselors and sit down, because there's just a massive population that needs help versus how many people there are to help?
Yeah, I think it depends on what level of care you're talking about. Absolutely, people can be trained in things like psychological first aid. When people are just getting out of a trauma experience, sometimes just a listening ear and handing them a bottle of water and saying, hey, I'm here for you, I'm going to get you help, is really important. And, some people really appreciate a listening ear and a doctor who can check them out and make sure that they're physically okay. And for some people, that may be the extent of what they need. Some people may continue to have symptoms for several months or years afterwards, and those people may benefit from talking to a licensed clinician. I would really say that it depends on the person, though. There are some studies that have shown that lay people can be trained in things like CPT to help. I think it is with sexual trauma. I'm trying to remember where the study took place, but they did train some lay people to do parts of the therapy and they saw good results. So I do think just a willingness to help is important. We're not needing everyone to have a master's or a PhD, although we certainly could use more of those providers also.
Absolutely. I would, if I remember right, in the early pandemic, New York University had started this program, and it was retroactive for any of the doctors that were graduating and doctors coming in. They actually gave them tuition forgiveness, but only if they signed up to be general practitioners. And I don't know what the time span was for that, but I'm thinking that would be something to get more people into it, because people can spend the time. Sometimes it's also about the money and ending up in so much debt afterwards. These professions that are licensed professions, they're expensive, and I said, time, we all have time. We can make the time, but we don't have money printers in our homes. But that would be something I guess I'm dreaming too, but the fact that they did it with regular physicians, it could be done in any discipline. It could be done with nurses. It can be done with psychologists, just to get the needs filled out there. So free tuition. So I wanted to ask you to kind of lighten things up here. Can you think of some really feel good or heartwarming or funny story in your career?
Well, you'd asked me that beforehand. It's like, well, with therapy, I can't really share a whole lot of stories, but I can laugh at myself. So we talked about how I kind of accidentally joined the military. And one of the first things that you have to do in officer basic training is pass a physical fitness test. And I had worked out with my recruiters and I felt pretty good about it, but I think it was like 4 or 5 in the morning, I'm half asleep and there's people yelling at us. And I realized that for whatever reason, I was just so tired that I found this funny. And I'd done my push-ups and gotten done with that part. And I was on the sit-ups and the guy just got in my face and starts yelling at me. And I just bust out laughing. And I was 2 push-ups away from the minimum passing score. And I was laughing so hard that I could not do another push-up, a sit-up. And so because I found this funny, I had to do some remedial PT. And yeah, I've just learned that I don't always do well in those situations. I find it funny if people are yelling at me and it doesn't make sense to my brain.
That's a great reaction, actually. I tend to get, when people are yelling at me, I get nervous and I want to flee. And that we all know in training, I was enlisted, and obviously you're an officer, but everybody gets their share of being yelled at in the military. So there's people who are below you, but there's plenty of people above you. So, the yelling can dribble down, but it also, a lot comes from up above too. So, one of the things that I wanted to, and this is more of an opinion thing about your survey. When this comes out as a guideline, do you think it's going to reshape the treatment, mental health treatment of Ukrainians in the United States or in general, or do you think it's just one of the many tools that we're going to need when you get the information all put together?
Well, I certainly would love to say, it'll just shape the future of everything. But realistically, research works by getting small pieces of information at a time. So I certainly don't think this will be the end all be all. It certainly, I think, will be helpful for providers. And we're attempting to get more in-depth information than some previous studies have, to include asking about people's spiritual life, as well as asking about their symptoms, if they have any potentially stressful experiences they've gone through, if they're willing to share those. So we're trying to get more in-depth information, but I certainly don't think that this will be the end.
Mm-hmm. Maybe just a stepping stone. You have the advantage of being in Sioux County in Iowa, where there is a large amount of Ukrainian refugees, and that's in no small part thanks to Mother Martha, who single-handedly brings a ton of people, into the United States. So it's a great community to be in. How would somebody who wants to help find communities to distribute your survey? Do you have any I suppose if you knew the secrets, you'd have more surveys, but any more tips and tricks besides finding groups or church groups or things like that?
Well, I think word of mouth is often one of the best ways to advertise, whether that's for research or for business. So if you just ask around if anyone knows anyone who's in the US from Ukraine and you could pass it on, maybe they'll know someone else. You're certainly welcome to share in groups. That would be helpful. But even if you don't know groups, just keep your ear open. And if you hear of anyone that you think might be able to help, I'd really appreciate it.
There was, in fact, if the Ken from UATV does not hear this, remind me, because I found him a Ukrainian group in Madison, Wisconsin. It's through a dance teacher. She actually wanted to give Ukraine. Have you heard of that one?
I haven't. No.
So she wanted to give, with any community that's a refugee community, you start with one, then more come in, and then the people who are new kind of have to pave the way for the rest of them, but a lot of them are at a loss. Well, what do we do? And what I've seen in this particular instance, this lady's she's an award-winning ballroom dancer. She's Ukrainian, but she's been here for quite a while. And what she did is she opened her doors to dance lessons and just said, "Hey, let's come dance." And from that, there was a lot of people meeting each other and camaraderie. So I'm going to pass that along to you. I have the information. I'll dig it up afterwards. But the community is I believe it's quite large, because they were doing Ukrainian food fairs. Now they have like once a month organization things, and it really grew. So I can't put anything into type, but just remind me, because I found that. And because this viewer, he asked me, he goes, "I want to help Ukrainians, and outside of YouTube, I want to get out." So he was doing it the healthy way. And I got on there while we were talking, and I just said, "Oh, look at this lady. She's great." And I sent him all the links and everything. So I'm not sure what came of that, but I think too, just so people know, just Google Ukraine groups, and you just never know what you're going to come up with. You might just find one person that can open the doors to all sorts of things, just like Martha did for everybody I know that's coming on the stream here. I want to actually say hello to a few people in Chat Viper. I see you here. Thank you for being here. We have, just so you know, we do have people who are in Ukraine currently who are in the chat. So I see them, and I'm sure that we probably have other ones listening and will listen. So we've covered a lot today. Is there anything that you can think of that we haven't covered that you feel is important in your work? Give you an opportunity to open every door you can.
I'm never good at closing remarks or anything like that.
We're not closing. I'm just trying to think if there's something I haven't covered yet. So.
No, I think we've covered most of the topics that you've talked about. I guess maybe we didn't cover the small piece on stigma. I know you'd mentioned that that sometimes the Ukrainian community really wanted to be strong and didn't want to reach out for help. And I think I've seen similar things with the military. There's a stigma for seeking help. And I just like to say, if you are experiencing any kind of symptoms, if you're feeling down, if you're feeling anxious, if you're having nightmares, these are really common reactions to the uncommon situation of war. And it's not your fault. It does not make you a weak person. And it's actually a really good thing to reach out and try to find resources to help you to be able to feel better and be able to support the people that you care about.
Okay. My team is amazing, and I actually got to one of the rooms with the questions in here on my phone. So I'm going to start firing off some questions for you here. Let's see. Okay. This one is from Janine. Janine is in our community. She's my best friend, and she volunteers for the Magic Food Kitchen. She's currently in Kyiv. And her question is, how can a person who is currently in Ukraine, not in the military, but as a civilian who's seen lots of things and has to deal with air raids and things and deal with PTSD while still in Ukraine? And are there some steps that a person can take without going to see a clinical psychologist to deal with it? And I kind of know where she's coming from, because even as a volunteer, she works 13, 14-hour days. She might get 1 or 2 days off in there, but the need is so incredible for volunteers. And that kitchen provides food for frontline soldiers. So you can imagine how important it is. And so can you give her a little help there?
Yeah, it sounds like you're doing some great work, although I can imagine it's very stressful. I know a lot of the research on PTSD and trauma focuses on helping people after they're out of traumatic circumstances and helping them when they know they're safe. So that's a different kind of treatment or recommendation than to someone who's in the midst of the stress. And it sounds like your body is probably on alert from the constant stress of war and all the different stories that you're hearing as you're serving in this kitchen. One thing that I think could be helpful is, I know this might seem a little bit crazy given the amount of time you're working, but is trying to take 10 or 15 minutes a day where you're not in the midst of all of this. If there's a place to you that feels safe and feels quiet, if you can take that time to be able to pray or engage in some kind of deep breathing exercises or centering exercises, that can be really helpful, even if it's just a small amount of time in you kind of resetting your system and giving you a bit of time away from that. Now, I know that certainly doesn't fix everything, but it may help you feel a little bit more refreshed or rejuvenated if that time is scheduled and you're taking it most days.
I think one of the things too, because I have been on WhatsApp calls with her and I've heard missiles, the air raid sirens, I've heard the interception, the explosions. I mean, when they're that loud and you can't sleep, it's being surrounded. I had actually said to her, maybe we can, because we do know people who are going to Ukraine who aren't actually in the eastern area of Ukraine and in the west. And have you heard about some of these places, retreats in the mountains that they have there, where you just go away, get away from it all? Because obviously in the mountains they're not getting bombed up there. But I'm wondering, let me just comment, LWD Farm gifted 5 memberships. Thank you so much. I'm doing this because I can't scroll to see them, so I'm going to read them out right away. But do you... I know the programs right now are open for soldiers, but what's your opinion about retreats where just sort of get away from it all, get away from all the stimulus and just be with nature? And do you, what kind of a treatment modality with that? Do you have your opinion on that? Is it something just good for the short term, or could it be therapeutic in the long term?
Well, getting out into nature is something that's been shown to be helpful. on one hand, it is a time that can just reset your system because you know in that moment that you're safe. So you're not on alert. So it gives you that time to rest. Some people may find that they're able to do a lot of processing during that time that maybe they can't do when they're busy. With some soldiers that I've worked with, they have been just so busy for their entire career that they maybe don't even recognize that they have symptoms until they retire and slow down. So I do think it's really important to slow down in the midst of stress so that you can process the stress in smaller bits rather than having it all just kind of come in as a landslide, a few years later. So I think that is helpful. One other thing I want to point out is I've read a couple of studies that have come out of Ukraine that have suggested that the civilian population reports just as many symptoms as the soldiers do. And so just because you're not a soldier does not mean that you're not stressed or that this is not a stressful experience. And so I think that's important to recognize also is that many people are feeling the heavy effects of war, not just the soldiers.
What do you think, and that's actually when our community talks about PTSD, we really we don't talk about just the soldiers. It's the people who are living through the air raids and the bombs and the when you look at the apps, the apps that literally tell you what's incoming. It's helpful, but it's also, creates a sense of anxiety, I think, too. Before the next question, you brought up a good point about the civilians. Where do you think the kids who are being born into this war, who are in their formative years, going to school in basements, where do you think their heads are going to be at later on as an adult? They're going to need therapy, or do you think they're resilient enough to just say, oh, well, this is the way it was? And
well, that's
an opinion.
A highly speculative question. One thing that we do know from studying trauma is that resiliency does tend to be the most common outcome. So I would assume that many of the kids will be resilient and that they'll go on to lead normal and productive lives. But there is a certain percentage of people who will have symptoms. And for some of them, the symptoms may be delayed. They may not notice them until they're older or until they experience other stressful things in life. So we can't necessarily predict who will have symptoms, even if people have experienced all of the same thing. A community of people can all go through the same trauma or stressor, and some of them will have certain symptoms and some of them will not. So it's kind of impossible to say who will and who won't. But one thing that we have seemed to find is that people who have this sense of purpose or meaning do tend to be at least a bit more resilient. And so your friend who reached out who's working with the soup kitchen, I think that's a great thing. If you have this sense of purpose and that you're helping, it certainly doesn't make you safer, but I think it can give you something to help you keep going and something to work for rather than just getting stuck in despair.
David and I talked a bit, quite a bit about this too, and I think you and I touched on it that sometimes the way to feel better is just making somebody else feel better. Do something good for somebody else, and it'll lift yourself up too. Just spend the time. At the end of the day, take a little inventory. Did I do something good for someone today, or did I leave their day someone else's day miserable? That's my test. I never want to go to sleep thinking I made someone miserable. So let's try the alternative. If I helped one person, it's great. That's actually why I do these streams, because it's to, win hearts and minds, but it's also to open people's, brains up about things that they haven't heard about or they might not know about. And your survey, you say you're not sure what the future is. Having, been involved in research, you never know, but I have a feeling this is going to be something that's going to be pretty big down the road. So kudos to you. I have a lot of hope for that. We have another question from Sweet 70433, a longtime listener. Thank you for being here. Can PTSD be cured or just treated?
Well, I guess that depends on what your definition of a cure is. There is no, at least legal and ethical treatment that is going to erase trauma memories. So, that piece isn't going to go away. But there are treatments that can reduce people's symptoms to the point where they don't qualify for a diagnosis of PTSD anymore. So we would probably consider that a cure. However, if you experience trauma, that's not to say that your life won't be different. Again, there's nothing legal and ethical that I can do to make you, forget these memories and the things that you've seen. So life may be changed and different, but you may be able to live life without the symptoms of PTSD, if that makes sense.
It does. In my healthcare career, some people have chronic conditions that we can't cure them, but we can turn, I say, think of a dimmer switch. It's not like an on-off switch. You're either on or off. Think of it as a dimmer switch. And we're going to try to get that dimmer switch down to the lowest point where you don't even notice the lights, on there. So it helps you live with it. And it's not taking over your life, and it's not invading your brain every single day. So, no, I agree with that 100%. Thank you. So this is a very broad question. Blonde Bombsheller says, what are symptoms of PTSD? And I imagine they're different for every group, but what are main symptoms that you see?
Well, if we're thinking about the DSM-5, which is kind of seen as the mental health diagnostic Bible, so to speak, by psychologists, there's 4 different clusters of symptoms in PTSD. And one of these is re-experiencing. So you may have what we consider flashbacks or intrusive thoughts. So intrusive simply meaning you're not trying to think of what happened, but it just pops in your mind, either during the day or while you're sleeping, and it interferes with your life. So these intrusive symptoms are one piece. Another piece is symptoms in reactivity. So you may feel more jumpy, you may feel less safe, or like you're hypervigilant and looking around. These are also symptoms that can be helpful while trauma is happening. So if you're in an unsafe situation, this actually can be helpful, but it's harmful once you're in a safe place and you feel like you can't relax or calm down. People often notice mood changes, so they may feel numb, they might feel irritable, they might have trouble focusing on things, they might feel really angry about things. So these mood symptoms and changes are common. And then another piece of PTSD is what we call avoidance. In avoidance, we're spending a lot of time trying not to go to that place, trying not to think about what happened, trying not to associate with people who remind us of the event. And although the avoidance piece really makes sense because no one wants to re-experience trauma, avoidance actually can lead to the maintenance of symptoms, because then you're never showing your brain that it's okay to think about these things or it's okay to talk about these things. They continue to feel like a threat to the brain. So these symptoms can show up in lots of different ways, like isolating from other people, not sleeping well, feeling really forgetful or distracted, taking a lot of time trying not to think about what's happened. All of these can be symptoms of PTSD.
I think that first one that you mentioned is something that we can all identify with, because I've had people say the same thing. They're like, I can't stop thinking about it. And I've had situations in my life where I call it the movie that doesn't stop. And it's like a movie reel, and you just keep, it comes in and you can't keep it from coming in, because you can be sitting there making dinner and all of a sudden it pops in your head. It's like, I didn't turn that channel on, and it goes and goes and goes and goes. And what I learned is just, okay, let it go. Don't try to fight it. And eventually, hopefully it'll turn itself off. And then when they say time heals all wounds, time does help that. But those movie reels, especially when you're dealing with, having seen a horrible, like a death scene, or you're dealing with, any kind of trauma that might be visual too, that can create a visual for you. The movie just keeps rolling, and it is really, really hard, but eventually it does tend to, fall off there. But I can't imagine, I guess I have a lot of compassion for people who never get to that point where it's just constantly reminding and never being able to run from your own head, but distraction, could help. But I didn't realize too, and a lot of my viewers know this because they know me, that I had one situation in the military when I was on a medevac, or was not an evacuation flight. We were just doing transport from soldiers over in Germany. And we ended up somewhere where there was actually an air alert that went off. And in Iowa, our sirens are same as air raid alerts. I mean, and I didn't realize how affected I was when I heard that horn go off the first time. I literally shook from head to toe. And that's part of one of the reasons I need to get out of here, because on Saturday at noon, that thing goes off. And I literally just feel like I'm tightening up. And oh my gosh, it's not just that. Can I handle weather? Of course. But that siren just turns me into a shaking disaster. And I thought after, I thought I would get used to it, but I'm simply not. It seems to be getting worse. So let's put that in the rearview mirror if we can. And I think some of the people that I hang out with kind of know that too. I've said, yep, if it wasn't for those sirens, I think I might somebody whispering, there's going to be a tornado, might be more effective than ring. So, but
we'll work on those sirens that just whisper.
So let's see. There was another good question in here. Okay. Our listener, Leslie Bowe, she's also on our team. She said, how do you fix when you've had PTSD for a long time? And she says, how do you fix loss of thought process? I guess I'm not, if you can expound on that a little bit, Leslie, not really sure.
So I can maybe step in and see if I'm on the same page as what she is. So for some people with PTSD, there's this lack of memory surrounding the trauma event. And I'm wondering if that's what she's referring to.
Mm-hmm. Let's go with that and we'll see. Maybe she'll write something in the chat here.
Okay. Well, the evidence-based treatments for PTSD typically require a client to either talk about or write about their trauma event. And I know that might not seem like much fun. No one really wants to go back there and relive that. But by doing so, oftentimes clients are able to make more connections or gain more insight into what happened, as well as helping treat some of the symptoms related to that. Now, if there was something like a head injury involved during the event, you may not get that memory back. But some people do find that they're able to remember more by, repeatedly telling their story and writing their story down through some of these treatments.
Okay. Another question, and I'm not sure if this was which veterans we're talking about, whether it's U.S. veterans. I think it's just war veterans in general. What psychology techniques do you use for veterans with PTSD and possibly depression? And thank you for your service.
Yeah, the three treatments that I mentioned earlier are some of the most common. So the cognitive processing therapy is related to cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's a treatment that talks about different thoughts and feelings related to the event, as well as how they've affected your belief system, how you feel like maybe your trust, for example, has been affected. And it's a therapy that has quite a homework component. So you're asked to track your thoughts and feelings throughout the week and then bring them to session and talk about them. The prolonged exposure is a treatment where you are telling your story throughout session with as much detail as you can to help try to desensitize you to some of the most stressful parts of that story. And then in EMDR, you are imagining different parts of the story while also engaging in what we call bilateral movement. So either following a light bar with your eyes, or if you're online, possibly doing some kind of tapping like this to get both sides of your brain activated to help you with your processing. So all of these treatments do involve going back to the trauma, either through talking or through writing or through imagining it, to help you process through the stressful pieces of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Leslie did write in here, and let's see. I think I kind of understand where she's going with this, where if you're thinking about the trauma or whatever's worrying you or bothering you, and it's bugging you so much, you look at something and you know that you have a project to do, you know you have to clean the house, you know you have to, go to the store, get some groceries, you have to get your laundry folded, and you just go numb and you're not able to organize your thoughts to the point where you can accomplish a task. I've been there in that situation. Part of me is just like, just take one step and just start it, but it is, sometimes it's hard when you're doing a project or you need to address something in your life, and your thoughts just don't allow you to organize. I mean, is that something that goes with PTSD too? You can be so consumed with the trauma.
Yeah, so those intrusive thoughts can take over and make it difficult to focus on things, or they make it really difficult to concentrate. So that certainly can be a stress-related symptom. Sometimes things that I find helpful for clients are having them set different reminders on their phone. If you maybe forget to take out the laundry or pick up your kid or take your medication, having some kind of alarm set on your phone can be helpful. So long as your alarm doesn't sound like the air raid siren that's going to bring you back to stressful places. Pick something calm and nice, not one of those stressful alarms, or making a list for yourself. But I also think that it's really important to have grace for yourself. Oftentimes we talk to ourselves in a really negative way. We call ourselves lazy or dumb or stupid in a way that we would never talk to a friend. And I think it's important to talk to our own selves like we're our friend and be patient with ourselves. Again, these symptoms aren't fun, but they're very common reactions to the situation of war or the situation of moving to an entirely different culture. These symptoms are something that many people experience. They're not your fault. Yes, they can be tough to deal with, and we need to give ourselves grace and a bit of space that we would give to someone else if we were talking to them experiencing the same situation.
That's great advice, because we're always saying to other people, don't be too hard on yourself. We say that to other people. Don't take it so hard. Don't be hard on yourself. It's not that bad, but we never do that with ourselves. We hold ourselves at such high expectations that we can barely live up to our own standards. So you're absolutely right on that. That's it's a great thing to do. And I have this little thing I send to people too sometimes. If you can't handle one month, you can't handle 1 week, you can't handle 1 day, then just try it 1 hour, 1 minute or 1 second at a time, because sometimes that's what it takes to just get through, and sometimes if I look at a project too, and, I'm worrying about something, I tell myself, you know what, I think this project's a little bit too big for me to take on right now, and I'm going to go do something else. So, and I don't know, what's your, and I could give you the exact example. I had told you that my mom passed away in March, and there's a section of her boxes downstairs that I know what's in those boxes, and I still haven't been able to go in there and work on those boxes. So I just kind of go around and I pick a box here and I pick a box there. But the timing, what would be your comment about the timing of approaching some of these projects or things in your life that are just hard to do when you can't organize your thoughts, or you're dealing with, memories and that might be overwhelming, and you just feel like, I don't want to be that person today. I don't want to cry every time I open a box. What's your thoughts on that?
I think it's important to have an idea of what your values are as a person. We all have this idea of what we should do and what we should accomplish. And oftentimes it's much more than what a person really can do, at least, and still get sleep and spend time with their family. And it's okay to say, today I'm going to focus on this value, and opening those boxes is not that value. Today I'm going to keep my family alive and fed. Today I'm going to go to work and make the money to pay my rent. And these boxes can come later. Maybe they're not something that's important to you. Unless they're in the way of something that you really need, it's understandable that you might not want to get to them. And opening them up might bring back some painful memories that you don't feel like you're ready for. And that's okay. You don't need to open the boxes today. It's okay to just focus on what matters to you today. So long as you're living a life in line with your values, it's okay if you're not accomplishing everything. Nobody can get everything done in one day.
Yeah. I think too is that nobody's alone in these thoughts at all. You're never alone, because as soon as you reach out and try to talk to somebody, maybe you find out, they're avoiding things worse than you are. And when it comes to, dealing with death in your life, I've had people say, oh yeah, I couldn't go into that room for 10 years. It's just because you face it on your own schedule unless you're forced to, but absolutely. And I think that would you say that with PTSD, is there a everybody's time frame about dealing with everything and getting better is different? Or do you find that there's like with research, you'll see a set amount of time that's common with everybody, no matter what the trauma?
No, everyone is different. And some people have delayed onset symptoms. So some people might not even notice symptoms right away, but might start noticing them later. We're all unique. Our brains work differently. So there is no set timeline. Now, after a stressful experience, the majority of people will notice their symptoms kind of lessening after a certain amount of time. But for some people, those symptoms stick around for longer. And again, we don't necessarily know which people that will be or why, but everyone's course of symptoms is different. Now, when it comes to these evidence-based treatments, many of them are between 8 and 16 sessions. And again, the majority of people who complete these treatments do notice a significant decrease in their symptoms, with many not having the symptoms for PTSD anymore. But everybody is a little bit different. That probably has something to do with the different traumas we've experienced and how many that is. It has something to do with our brain structures, has something to do with how well we like our therapists and our support system. So there's so many different factors. I can't say there's one prescribed way that people struggle with symptoms or have PTSD.
How much studying have you done, or have you, can you comment on that? like with Ukraine, they're going to have an entire population that's dealing with PTSD. I think, and again, it's my opinion. I want you to comment in that you've got, the people that are in, Kyiv and East, obviously. Some are still there. They're being traumatized every day. Some of them have gone west. Some of them have left the country. But I think in a sense that the whole country is dealing with just the fact that they're at war, their economic changes, the uncertainty in the future. How much research out there is there about entire populations that have been affected by a war in their country? Is the data out there to draw on, or?
I probably should look into this a bit more. I'm trying to dig into the research a bit.
Sorry, I blindsided you with that, but it just kind of came into my head there.
Yeah. Well, sometimes when entire populations are facing something, that can make it even more stressful because, like you said, then other people aren't necessarily there to have that bandwidth to help. But sometimes people also do come together after natural disasters, and you'll see the best in people. And I will say that, again, many people do come out of these types of experience resilient. So they may experience some symptoms that go away once the stressor resides, but then many people also will have some symptoms. And it's hard to say, not all soldiers are going to have PTSD, not all civilians are going to have PTSD, but certainly some will. And again, that's based on so many different factors. I do think that there is a need for mental health providers and others interested in helping to, start looking into some of these effects so that we can better help. There will certainly be a need, once the war ends also, and more people have time to really address their mental health more. I think one thing that's difficult for soldiers is that on deployments or during war, they don't necessarily have the time to process, and maybe going through one trauma after another, where maybe their body or mind would have naturally processed through it had they been given time, but they may be moving on to the next mission or the next situation. And so it can compound, and they may not necessarily know how they'll be doing once everything ends.
Right, until they get to that point. And the one thing about the U.S. military, you and I both know this, is that, when there are time limits on deployments, whether, like for me in the Navy, if, people went on a Westpac, it was 6 months. It's a fixed place in time. And when the war first started and we were fortifying the United States presence over in some of the NATO countries, the time away from their family was more than 6 months. And I'm not sure which branch. I'm thinking affected Army the most, I think, because Navy obviously on ships, but the family started saying, this is supposed to be a temporary deployment. My husband's over there. These kids haven't seen him on anything but video for 9 months, and he wasn't even supposed to be there that long. So they actually did make some bases permanent over there, official. They made official, like I think they did it in Finland, and I'm pretty sure they did it in Romania, so that they could have on-base housing. And I don't know how they picked who it was that was going to get to go over there, but at least our military did something about that. And obviously, we're not operating in a war period where they're in combat, but I like that our military is proactive and does recognize that a soldier's stronger when he has his family support and he has that break. But one of the things that I've been hearing, and I'm sure that some people in the chat know, that there's soldiers that have been at those front lines and they haven't seen their families for a year. And but because of the shortage, they're not able to get there or get back to see their family. And the fact that they maybe don't have money, they need some private donations or something, at least just to get back and see that family again. Do you think that element there is going to compound the after effects of, when this is all done? or, I mean, you kind of already answered that everyone's going to deal with differently, but what I'm asking is, for a soldier, how do you feel that separation from family compounds the problem?
Yeah, it can be really tough. I think a lot of people think that military and VA psychologists mostly see PTSD. There's that assumption. It must be trauma. But a lot of the problems are things like marital issues. You know, a soldier may not be as effective if he's worried that his wife is going to divorce him, or, you know, if the soldier is worried about a sick child back home, or their grandparent just died. All of these things certainly can affect their mental health. And these are things that that the VA in the U.S. does work with veterans on treating. You know, it's not just PTSD that can happen to soldiers. Other normal life issues can happen too, and especially grief and marital problems are common.
Absolutely. I want to just kind of break off, if we have any new listeners in our chat. Dr. Wittern, you know, one of our goals today is to get her survey out there. It is written in Ukrainian. The team has been dropping the links, and that survey is meant for Ukrainian refugees in the United States. They need to collect data from them to find out, or to put together some information about what mental health needs that they need, and hopefully it'll help with some programs moving forward, or information for clinicians in the future on helping the refugees. She also has her email in there, and if the survey is completed, then they can email. And can you tell us about how the gift card works?
Sure. So it's just an online Amazon gift card. My business office here at Northwestern has very kindly agreed to help with that. So it would be an email that would come from Northwestern College with a link to the $20 Amazon gift card.
Okay, and that's for the Ukrainian refugees who are filling out the survey.
Right.
Okay, perfect.
If you're not from Ukraine, well, sorry, we can't pay you. We're looking specifically for those from Ukraine who have moved here because of the war.
I could just see a room full of people tapping out surveys and going, okay, now I got $100 here. But, you know, people are resourceful there. I don't see any more questions in here. So we'll kind of get to wrap ups. I want to thank, I'm going to go back through just so I didn't forget anybody, because as you all know, my mouse died, and it is a corded mouse. It's something with my computer, and it's never happened. But I want to thank everybody who's contributed. If you actually contributed to the Ray of Life project, which is pinned in the top of the link, thank you for doing that. Dave Nonemacher, who puts together groups to assemble that box. I'm going to be having him on again with the man that actually does the shipping for them. And he's got his own wonderful story, because he has been in Ukraine, and the amazing stuff that they're doing with fire equipment over there. So that's going to be coming up too. Let me go back in here. So just to kind of go back so I didn't forget anybody, dunk on you in the beginning. He sent 5 Shills memberships. Thank you so much for giving us more brothers and sisters. Yvonne Way, super sticker for $5, and LWD Farm gifted 5 Shills memberships. Again, the family grows. Thank you, everybody. So I want to thank the team. I think I told you that we have, Rachel, we have an incredible team that backs us up. We have Dick Dawson, who's a producer and runs everything in the background, which you kind of know now how he's a kind of a magic person back there. He can fix anything. Shayna, who's in the Shills account today, that's usually what I do on other shows, and she's doing it today for my stream. Liam Wakefield, who has been with our, I don't know, most of you know he's been with us for a while, but he's really an amazing person. And we may have some team members in the background, Leslie Bow, Crazy Cat. Thank you so much for all your support too. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Rachel. just for some closing thoughts and the last thing you'd like to have on people's minds as they leave the stream.
Well, this may be a repeat from some things that I said earlier, but the people that have the most happiness or most purpose in the world are people with good social connections. So don't give up on meeting with people. Don't give up on the people around you. Try to find people who you can support and who support you, because that's one of the most important things that you can do to get through a stressful experience.
Helping others. And just a reminder, we have the Ukraine stream that was rescheduled from yesterday. You can go ahead and check the schedule on that. That I think is coming up in about an hour and 15 minutes from now. Rachael, thank you so much for being here. I hope that we can have you on again. So later on down the line, when you have more information on how your research project went, and I'm kind of a research nut too, so I want to see where this all goes, and if it goes into some programs and how it helps people. You're doing amazing work, and thank you for all of that for the community, and thank you for your service for the military too. So. All right, everybody, I think we're going to be out. And Rachael, don't go off right away because Dick will just keep us on, but the stream will be finished. So, all right, thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.